Hi, Vesperisms listeners. I'd like to announce a change to my Patreon community. I'm no longer going to be offering tiered memberships, but only a flat $5 a month membership to the Vesperisms community on Patreon. This will enable me to keep doing this podcast and to do the work that I do in creating books for young readers. If you come aboard for $5 a month, you'll get occasional behind-the-scenes looks at what I'm creating, ongoing conversation, as well as live Q&As for members only. So if you'd like to join me, just head to patreon.com/Vesperisms, and I'll see you there. And now back to the show. Greetings and salutations, and welcome to Vesperisms, the art of thinking for yourself. I'm your host, author-illustrator Vesper Stamper, and I'm here to help you recalibrate your artistic worldview. So grab your coffee and have a seat in my studio, and let's get started. This is Season 3, Episode 1, a Vesperisms Update. It's been an interesting year for the podcast. I haven't released an episode since June, and I wanted to explain why. Yes, I've been head down working on my next novel about the Berlin Wall going up in 1961, as well as other illustration projects, but it's more than that. My research into the conditions that preceded the wall was pretty intense, and a bit too close to our current global reality, to be honest. I am deeply concerned, and I have been for some time. Many people have been making clumsy comparisons to various historical events and regimes and the like, and I wanted to be careful to be sure that my words were my own and to be sure that I wasn't just spouting off, but coming from a place of knowledge. There's a lot that I want to say. And as we go on into this new season of the podcast, I will, but I have to pace it properly, and I want to keep it relevant to artistic thinking, not just general opinion. Things have been changing fast. One minute you think things are going to get normal again, and the next they plummet to a whole new level of crazy. And I'm not a talking head pundit who does commentary on current events. That is a very popular format these days, and I understand. And there's a lot of those out there, but those people do nothing but politics, and I don't. I actually completely resent that I have to pay any attention to these things at all. Becoming an author, and especially doing historical fiction, sometimes it exhausts me. Don't get me wrong, I am fascinated by the research, and I love what I do. But right now, gosh, I'm just a bit beat up. Do you feel that way too? Recently, I came across a section of the PBS website for the show American Masters, where there are archived interviews of artists talking about other artists. So there was Maya Angelou talking about Quincy Jones, David Bowie and Patti Smith talking about Lou Reed. It was awesome. I wish there were hours and hours more of these interviews, and I think I'd listen to nothing else. And the interviews were all from the time I was coming up as an artist in the 90s. And it was amazing to hear this ethos that I was familiar with, of an unwavering commitment to one's art, of artistic community that had nothing to do with social media, of a radical pursuit of one's vision, even if, like Quincy Jones, one was called on to compose music for a presidential inauguration. It was the last vestige of a punk rock, anti-censorship path for artists that, as far as I'm concerned, got obliterated with the advent of social media. And now I lament that most artists have strayed far from retaining that punk rock value. Some of my heroes have become the biggest conformists imaginable. They've become fearful of what they could lose if they get out of lockstep with the institutions, whether those are cultural or political or academic institutions. These people, these former heroes of mine, have become the loudest voices for the state, with a capital S. They do whatever the highest paid news anchors and government bureaucrats tell them to do. They shame others for disagreeing. And I frankly find it disgusting, and I refuse to go along with it. I refuse to hand over my independence to any system or machine. And that is a value that I have always held, always. And this is partly why I took such a hiatus from the podcast. As the culture deteriorated further through the year, I had this lament in my spirit, mainly about my fellow artists. Friends of more than 20 years got nasty with me all of a sudden out of nowhere. And I wondered whether if I spoke up about what I really thought, I might suffer consequences professionally. I wasn't necessarily afraid of bad press for my books because we all know that controversy sells, right? So bad press, who cares? Great. My greater fear is actually that I would be ghosted or blacklisted from my industry. See, I'm totally willing to pay the price for my ability to speak freely, as long as I choose it, as long as it's what I choose. But something else was holding me back, and I had to explore what that was. When you grow up in a house where there are certain types of severe mental illness, you get accustomed to fighting for reality itself. We throw around the term gaslighting a lot, but that word has become, like so many other words, subjected to linguistic capture. And now, when people talk about gaslighting, what they really mean is, you disagree with me, and I don't want to question my presuppositions, and therefore you are evil and gaslighting me. But that's not gaslighting. It's not like that. Gaslighting is the day in, day out, chipping away at the confidence that you really can believe what you see with your own eyes. That you are the sane one. And that reality exists, and that you can choose to be sane even when that person is trying to pull you into their alternate universe. And so it has seemed to me like the entire country, and in fact even the superstructures of the world, have become another version of my childhood home. The kind of reinvention of factual history, of cultural memory, of the things you know you learned in elementary school that you are now being told you were never taught. And I find that when I'm in a situation of gaslighting, I actually face a real childhood trigger. And I don't mean that in the, in the casual use of that term. I mean it in the true psychological sense of the word, as a person who survived complex childhood trauma. It's this mixture of total paralysis and head swimming. It's this existential terror that everything you thought was correct could really be a lie, because that ill person is concocting another reality around you. So why have I been silent since June? Well, that's why. So over these past few months, in addition to the lament of the cowardice of my fellow artists, and it feels like it's coming at you daily, if not, weekly, I've had to deal with the gaslighting and the real-time reinvention of facts and narratives. And I kind of felt like I didn't want to add to the noise. I didn't want to be a pundit, and I didn't want to give anyone any kind of ammunition to use against me or my work, because the work that I was doing was really deep and it took a lot of concentration to try to keep my head in the game. I'd rather keep my mouth shut and say nothing than to give away anything that I don't choose to give away. I've had to push through the autonomic response to these reality games more than I have at any time since I was a kid. I've had to consciously rebuild my mental, emotional, and autonomic resilience and make sure that my words, my actions, and my art were my own. Listen, I do have opinions. I have very strong ones. Ask anyone who knows me. But first and foremost, I'm an artist. That is the lens through which I speak. Recently at a school visit, a student asked me, how would you label yourself? And I almost laughed. I didn't mean to be, I didn't mean to laugh at her, but I answered, well, I don't label myself. I refuse to label myself because I'm always learning and growing and changing. And so I told her the only label I would put on myself, I suppose, is artist. So I want to make some things clear as we move forward with this podcast into this next season, season 3, which is exciting. Let me first tell you what you're not going to get from me. What you're not going to get from me are these kind of sotto voce encouragements and fluffy, soft platitudes to make you feel better, and this problem of Instagram quotables and Insta therapy, I figure if you've been listening to me at all, you probably know that already. And there are plenty of podcasts out there if you just want to fall asleep in a warm bubble bath by candlelight and never have to think deeply or even, oh my gosh, horror of horrors, make changes. And you know what? I don't disparage those kinds of podcasts. I like to relax too, or at least they tell me that I should. But I actually don't think that that's what's called for. And that's not how I live. So I can't give you something that I don't have. So what you're not going to get from me is like hot take political analysis or political alignment of any kind. I have less than zero desire to build a kingdom for myself as some kind of play-by-play commentary or even to build a brand or get you to like me or to get more followers. Though I will say I am truly grateful to those of you who do listen to Vesperisms, and especially those of you who write to me that the podcast is actually helping you. That really means a lot to me. It first of all helps me to know that I'm on the right track. And I do thank you. And please keep it coming. Please keep writing to me. I don't need to be everyone's favorite flavor, but a lot of you tell me that I'm somehow helping to give voice to things that you're feeling, but may be afraid to say. And believe me, I haven't even said a fraction of what I really want to say. That's coming. So here's what you will get from me. On Vesperisms, I only give you what I myself have received. So everything that I offer you here is hard won through struggle, pain, joy, curiosity, rejection, my own perennial renegotiations with life, my life as an artist. It's what I've found allows me to move through the world, which is a really complicated and sometimes incredibly ugly world, with as much beauty and love and peace as I've been able to squeeze out of this one life that I have. I don't say anything on this podcast that I don't fully believe and own. There's a reason that I have the words truth and love tattooed on my wrists. It's because these are my two highest values, and I always strive to live in the intersection of truth and love. That being said, I also try to be as intentional and succinct as I can. I don't believe in throwing everything out there all at once or just venting or speaking my truth, whatever that means. I believe in communication, clear communication. After all, there's a reason that I chose to be an illustrator by trade. It's because I believe that communication is important. And I believe in communicating by building precept upon precept. So I believe that ideas worth having are formed over years, centuries, millennia. Not something I read online and thought about for 10 seconds and reposted because it gave me the tingles, or worse yet, because an important person said it, or God forbid, an influencer said it. I speak to you as my listeners and my readers with respect, the way that I speak to other adults. And by the way that I speak to the children I create work for, who definitely deserve respect. And I understand that not everyone will agree with me. Sometimes, you may not believe this, but sometimes I make people angry. And believe me, I hold back a lot. And that's okay if I make you angry. I'm angry too sometimes, especially now. But I love my anger. I embrace it. And I let it motivate me to try to do the best good that I can. To try to be a helper. Yes, anger can do that. It's a tricky beast to tame, but it can be done, and I'm working on it. So as an author of historical fiction, I'm very interested in the times that we're living in because in the future, this will be history, and so will we. So in 2020, I released A Cloud of Outrageous Blue, which is a story about the Great Plague of 1348. And it's been creepy, guys. I've basically watched my book play out in both disease and societal fallout for the whole of the last couple of years. And as I've said earlier, I've also been working on my new book, Berliners, which is a retelling of the story of Cain and Abel, and it's set against the building of the Berlin Wall in 1961. So I've watched as the events of 2020 and 2021, and even this far into 2022, have mapped with an eerie parallel onto the events which led, not just to the plague and its aftermath, but to the Berlin Wall going up and the split between East and West Germany into two separate nations with two separate and opposing ideologies. There's a lot of historical parallels that we can draw to different time periods, but this is the one that's foremost in my mind at the moment. The truth is that the Berlin Wall, and indeed the entire Cold War, could only have happened in the fallout of World War II and the Holocaust, which was, let's be clear, the intentional extermination of the Jewish population of Europe. When you hear about any book about the Holocaust, where does your mind instantly go? To the camps, right? So in my first novel, What the Night Sings, I instead ask the question of what happened after the camps. What was the aftermath? And if I mention the Berlin Wall, almost everyone responds with something about the wall coming down in 1989. But few of us asked what caused it to go up in the first place. It was only there for 28 years, after all. There was a reason why Germany split, and a reason why East Germany built this wall, complete with a death strip, right through the streets of a major metropolitan city. I mean, think about a wall with a death strip going, up Broadway in New York City. The wall was a direct result of the war. And I'm really excited to connect the dots for you when you read Berliners this fall. It's coming out this fall, guys. It's pretty exciting. I can't believe we're almost done. So this season of Vesperisms will deal with some of those matters. So over the last 5 years or so, I've been watching the absolute circus of the American political system, as we all have. And believe me, none of the drama has won me to either side. My anti-partisan nature has not shifted one iota, and in fact, it has deepened. None of these clowns have earned my allegiance. My political standard is the United States Constitution, which I actually do read. In fact, I keep a pocket copy on my person at all times, and I really recommend you do the same if you're in America. Even if you're not in America, it's a really interesting document. Elected leaders have one job, and that we loan to them as the people. We loan them the power, the job, to protect our inalienable rights, the rights that already exist, that we have. We don't earn those rights. We don't earn our citizenship. We have our citizenship in whatever country we're in, and we loan the power to the leaders to protect those rights. That's it. And they have utterly failed. Let me be very clear about this. Almost every single leader on this globe throughout the past couple of years has utterly failed us. But my political standard is not my highest standard. My spiritual standard is the highest, and just under that is my artistic standard. And so I'm left with what I've always had. Love my creator, keep the door open to loving people, even when it threatens to slam shut, and keep being an artist. Here on Vesperisms, as you know, if you've been listening since the first season, I've created a short list of isms about the artistic worldview, at least as far as I see it. And as we go on, I'll continue to reference those as clearly as I can. We've been very deeply politicized, obviously, but I believe we can and we must make a different choice. I believe that learning to think like an artist can help guide our choices as we navigate this new world we've been handed these last few years. In fact, I think we can begin to build something new and beautiful, but it's going to take a huge degree of intention. We are all exhausted. We have compassion fatigue, decision fatigue, pandemic fatigue, despair, anxiety, embodied pain, assaults to our nervous systems, creative paralysis. But if you'll allow me, I think we can begin to take back the energy we hand over to the powers that want our attention and redirect it towards something really important, regenerative, life-giving. I am an artist. Nothing will ever change that. This past December marked 9 years since a car accident paralyzed a nerve in my working arm. I've had to put aside my musical career, to take up novel writing, and to rebuild my career as an illustrator on a completely new set of terms, literally retraining my muscle memory. But what I realized from that is that even if I, God forbid, lost the full use of my hands or even my eyes, that wouldn't change who I fundamentally am as an artist, because this is a way of seeing and being in the world. It's not just a way of making. Being an artist is positional, and it's perspectival. It's about your perspective. We stand as artists in the place in between, on the borders, in the margins, and that's on purpose. If you've listened to a previous episode from season 2 called On Being Fireborn, I posited that if an artist leaves that in-between space, they venture into territory that's not ours to occupy. If we leave that in-between space out of a desire to fit in, we risk becoming either a bland normie or a destructive monster. And the artist has both propensities. It's our duty and our calling and our honor to stand on the border, to live in the liminal space, so that we can bear witness and build bridges. We artists see things that others don't see, and that's on purpose. Our sensory openness creates inner pathways in our spirit, and that's what allows somebody like Beethoven to compose his most beautiful works after losing his hearing. It's what allows a dissident like Václav Havel in Czechoslovakia, or Alexander Solzhenitsyn in the USSR, or currently Luis Manuel Alcántara in Cuba, to continue to make work, even to the point of Solzhenitsyn writing 1,700-page books in his head, all the while being exiled, blacklisted, even held and tortured as political prisoners. Artists are gonna art, no matter what. Knowing these valiant examples, imagine my dismay to see how artists have capitulated to this division and how the artistic community is largely contributing to it. Imagine my dismay when a late-night comedian can get up on TV and say that anyone who either chooses not to or is not able medically to receive a particular novel medical product should be allowed to die rather than enter a hospital emergency room. And not just that, to hear the crowd go wild. And now to hear that sentiment become mainstream among the privileged classes in wealthy shopping districts doing man-on-the-street interviews, or in the comments of the New York Times Instagram feed, while I see videos of protesters in Australia or down the Champs-Élysées in Paris being tear-gassed and fire-hosed or arrested on their knees for trying to eat in a Burger King in New York City, or to hold their government to account in Ottawa. Imagine my dismay when I see artist after artist demanding rules for thee but not for me, hypocritically dancing at clubs, crowding unmasked people into venues like the Super Bowl, flying off to their unimaginably wealthy enclaves, having masked servants carry the trains of politicians' haute couture dresses through our art museums, making themselves out to be the good people, and yet turning on their neighbors who are usually working class or minority communities, people they don't even know, to externalize and displace their fear and blame, to conclude that the reason why things seem out of whack is not because of their actions, but because of a nameless, faceless horde of unclean subhumans. Artists, does any of this sound familiar? Yes, I'm looking at you, and I'm looking at me. While you pour your morning coffee into a mug that says, "Be kind," are you participating in the dehumanization of your fellow man? Are you sipping a $10 smoothie while preaching "let them eat cake" as you do your Zoom call for your business to people losing their livelihoods and civil rights? The level of political conformity I have seen among my fellow artists is appalling. The role and responsibility of the artist is not to sit enthroned as some kind of special class of people who are exempt from the rules of human nature and responsibility. It's precisely those artists touting their specialness and their legendary status to compensate for their moral inadequacy, and they end up destroying others and themselves. And I don't have any tolerance or time for that, and I don't care if those people were my heroes. Some of our best artists have been our worst people. Never forget that. And we should have the humility to consider that the monster might be us. So what is the artist to do once he or she is willing to admit that we have a problem and we might be part of it? First of all, we need to realize that much of what we tell ourselves or type into the comments box or post on our Instagrams or tweet under our blue check marks has been fed to us by very crafty people and corporations and entities who do not have humanity in mind. As Voltaire said, "Whoever can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities." That was him writing in the 1700s. Can you imagine how much more serious it is living in the world of algorithm and metaverse? And by the way, I hope we are all freely and openly mocking the metaverse at every opportunity. But that's just an aside. A friend of mine recently went to work for this particular big tech company, and the reports she brings back from the inside are completely horrifying. I do not want to live in the world that they are building, precisely because, as an artist, I want the right to my own mind and everything that that entails. And make no mistake, they are not building this world for the public good or the cultivation of compassion or even that stupidly meaningless, linguistically captured word, empathy. They are simply doing it because they can. Damn you, damn your family and the people you love, damn your art, damn your social cohesion. They're just going to do it because they can. So let me ask you, artist. Let me ask you, Vesperisms listener. Who are the voices in your head? Who is telling you that you're a good person or a bad person? And why? What are the criteria? And why are you listening to that voice? What are their qualifications, their expertise, their track record? What is the end game of their narrative? What is the end game of what they are making? And is what you are making part of that? Artist, have you thought about your values lately? Have you, for example, been journaling enough that you can distinguish between your own thoughts and the absorbed thoughts of others? I'll be honest, I have struggled to journal for the past 2 years because it's strenuous to quiet my brain, to stop doom scrolling and get alone with my own mind. Have you thought about what principles govern your morality? Is it simply fear? Fear of death? Fear of being a bad person? Fear of losing your social cachet? Of losing your job or your professional opportunities? Could it be that our desire to control others, to demand obedience from strangers, to give a flip wave of the hand to the hardship of others is because of our own fear? And that we've become tools of disgusting people? Is it fear of being on the wrong side of history? Well, I can tell you, as somebody who studies this full-time for years, history doesn't have sides. History is just the story of people making their choices. And it doesn't take long looking at the historical record to realize that the cascade of people's choices, especially when it's manipulated by outside forces, can cause a revolution for the good or lead to total destruction. When I go to schools and speak about my books, I talk about the fact that atrocity is almost never wielded by distant people sitting in the seat of power. It's almost always wielded by neighbors against neighbors. And over the past year and a half, after the past 5 years or so, I've been, alarmed is not even the right word. Horrified, gobsmacked, stunned and speechless over the capacity that we have to be controlled like little lab animals, to bite and scratch and devour each other. It honestly doesn't take much. It starts with fear over the slightest perceived threat to my personal safety. And it grows into a belief that the locus of control is outside of yourself and squarely in the domain of your neighbor. It's the ultimate blame shift. And you're going to do that as an artist? You're going to do that as an artist? Lest we think that artists are above this, let's call to mind how many artists have been used to create propaganda posters and magazine ads in the past. Yes, there were painters and designers behind those. Posters that touted a bright future and manipulated people into towing the right political line, smoking the right brand of cigarettes that would kill them, or joining the right party, all the while saying nothing, as their neighbors were being picked up right off the street and sent to prisons and camps and, let's call them, re-education workshops. Artists participated in that. That could be me, and that could be you. And you may think that because you're an artist, if you toe the party line, the powers that be will see you as a good person and leave you alone. Well, then I have one word for you: Terezín. Terezín is a town an hour north of Prague in Czechoslovakia that was turned into a concentration camp during World War II. It's where Jewish artists and intellectuals were sent first, and they were placated with the ability to play a little music here and there, do a little graphic design work on the way to the gas. Artists are sought out by tyrants of all political types because political power isn't creative, but it recognizes artistic power. And if it can't bring the artist into its fold, the only alternative is to crush the artist's dissent. So, artist, are you going to be used by these people, these corporations, these outlets? I'm not. And so I would like to suggest that we pull our heads out of our rear ends. It may take a good, strong tug, but let's purge ourselves of this politicized nonsense that we've been jerked around with for too long. And let's start making art our number one topic of conversation again. Because no one is coming to save us at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, or in Brussels or Davos or 10 Downing Street. At this point, these are houses of lunatics, and I'm not interested in following their lead in any way. I have other concerns over here in the high resolution real world. Whether it's in my own illustration or writing work, whether it's speaking to audiences or here on the podcast, my concerns over here in the borderlands are to pay attention to what's happening with my neighbors, to care for them, to somehow bear witness to the truth, and to make the choice, yes, the choice, to love whatever ragtag bunch of folks that life puts in my direct path, because that is in my control. To take people as I find them, as I would hope that people would take me as they find me. And out of that, to make damn great work. So thanks for joining me on this week's Vesperisms. And if you found value in this episode at all, would you please leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, like and subscribe, all the things. Please do it. It makes a difference. We've got to share this artistic worldview to more people, don't we? You can follow me on Instagram at Vesper-illustration, get my newsletter and see my work at vesperillustration.com, and buy my books at your bookseller of choice. Berliners will be out for pre-order pretty soon. Please order them from your local independent bookstore first. And when you've read my books, please, whether you've bought them there or on the big A website, please do leave me a great review on Amazon and Goodreads. That helps me as an author immensely. Music for Vesperisms is provided by Ben and Vesper. That is my band. Listen, friend, I know it may seem like you and I are shouting into the wind, but trust me, your voice is important and your contribution matters. And just remember, work isn't everything, but everything is the work. See you next time.